Not again! Hello, I'm Bruce. Welcome to the basement. Our club is running a wargame campaign based on the 1857 Indian Mutiny. In this video, I'll tell you how we set up the campaign. From 1857 to 1859, northern India was engulfed in a great war known to history as the Indian Mutiny, or sometimes the Sepoy Mutiny or the Sepoy Rebellion. These names aren't really accurate, as it was far more than just a mutiny by the Indian soldiers, or sepoys as they were called. Many semi-independent Indian princes and landholders also rebelled against British rule, and were joined by tens of thousands of ordinary Indians. Indian historians call it the First Indian War of Independence, but it wasn't really that either. The rebellion was pretty much confined to northern India. The rebels were motivated by narrow reasons of self-interest, and more than two-thirds of India remained loyal to the British Raj. Without the help of these loyal Indians, northern India would have been lost to the British Empire. In 1857, most of India was ruled by the Honourable East India Company, a British corporation that had been founded in the 17th century to trade in Asia. By the mid-19th century, it had disposed of its commercial trading assets in India, and now earned its profits through the administration and taxation of the Indian subcontinent. For administrative purposes, India was divided into three districts or presidencies, the Bengal, Bombay, and Madras presidencies. Each of these presidencies had its own army of mercenaries, with the rank and file of most regiments being Indian, while the senior officers were European. Initially, the relationship between the Indian sepoys and the European officers was very close, but by the 1850s, many officers had taken more lucrative administrative posts with the company and were away from the regiments for years at a time. The trust between officers and men was gone, just at a time when the grievances of the sepoys, some imagined but many real, began to multiply. In May of 1857, the army of the Bengal Presidency rebelled. The causes given for the rebellion are many, and are beyond the scope of a wargaming video. However, the same reasons why the Bengal sepoys mutinied applied across India, but the armies of the Bombay and Madras presidencies did not rebel, and helped the British crush the mutiny. So why Bengal, and not anywhere else? The reason, I think, is this. Most of the sepoys in the army of the Bengal Presidency came from the northern Indian kingdom of Awadh, which, confusingly for my tongue, is spelled O-U-D-H. The profession of arms was considered an honourable one in India, and the men who served in the armies of the East India Company were looked upon with respect by their neighbours and families. In 1856, the East India Company annexed Awadh for no good reason, and the sepoys from Awadh went from being admired by their people to being the reviled agents of the occupying power. Dissatisfied with their lot, they only wanted a cause to convince their fellow sepoys to rebel. The rumour, almost certainly untrue, that the British were greasing the cartridges for the new Enfield rifle with the fat of pigs and cows, offending both Muslims and Hindus, was the spark that set off the mutiny. For our club, the Indian Mutiny offered us the opportunity to run a campaign using exotic armies in an exotic location, while still using the regimental fire and fury rules with which our club is familiar. We decided that each of the players would take on the role of a British column commander, while I, as the umpire, would control the mutineer forces. We decided to go this route because, although man for man the Indian sepoy was a good soldier, the mutineers were unlikely to win the campaign. They had no officers experienced in command at the higher levels, and so were always at a disadvantage against the British. Instead, each British commander would be competing against each other. Points were gained for battlefield victories, towns and fortresses taken, British garrisons relieved, knighthoods won, and Indian leaders captured. When the rebellion is put down, the British player who has earned the most points will be elevated to the peerage and win the campaign. To start, each player created a commanding officer and gave him a name. Accordingly, our commanders are Bertram Ramsay Codrington Smythe, Logan Dumfries, General Monroe, and General Bunsen Honeydew. Each player was tasked with creating a character using an amalgamation of a system found in Clash of Arms game Legion of Honor, and a system kindly shared with us by some players at Fall in Lancaster one year. We gave each player a background. It determined who their parents were, what class they were, where they went to school, if they were married and how many children they had, and what previous campaigns they had fought in, as well as any military specialties or personality quirks. Their background differed if they decided to be a Queen's officer or a company officer. This helped to humanize their character and get them invested in the campaign. Each player was then assigned a column, based on a real field force that served during the mutiny. They were allowed to name their field forces, so General Codrington Smythe commands the Army of Lahore, General Honeydew commands Honeydew's Relief Column, General Dumfries commands the Bengal Field Force, and General Monroe commands the Central India Field Force. I then had to research the Bengal Army to determine which regiments mutinied, when they mutinied, and where they showed up to fight. Thank heavens for Wikipedia! I also rather randomly came up with estimates of the retinues of the Indian princes who joined the rebellion. Fortunately, between Perry and I, we have huge numbers of cannons, sepoys, and other Indian troops, and can accurately recreate many of the British and loyal Indian forces who fought in the campaign as well. Based on this research, I created the Indian armies and placed them in the places where they served. The campaign needed a map. Perry has a board game called Sepoy Mutiny by Joseph Miranda, with a map by Joe Eust that is excellent for our purposes. Sepoy Mutiny was published by Decision Games, and if you can get your hands on a copy, you should. Map in hand, I decided each turn would cover 2 weeks of time, and set the movement distances per turn. I didn't worry too much about logistics, so as not to bog things down. However, I did worry about heatstroke. A column may force march, but will then lose 1d6 stands of European infantry or cavalry due to heatstroke. I also worried about battle casualties. At the end of each battle, the British player rolls a d6 for every stand he lost. On a 1 or a 2, the stand is dead and is out of the campaign. On a 3 or a 4, the stand is in the hospital, and every turn afterwards, I, as umpire, roll to see if it recovers. On a 5 or a 6, it was just a flesh wound and the stand comes back for the next battle. The losing force will also lose stands equal to the number of fresh cavalry the victor has in excess of the loser. I also keep track of Indian casualties, but lost Indian stands do not get to roll to see if they come back. They are dead or have gone home, as we don't want the campaign to go on forever. As the British will win most battles, but still have their numbers whittled down, I decided to let them start getting drafts of replacements of loyal Indian troops in July, and of European troops in September. Periodically, I send the players updates as to how the campaign is going in the newspaper The Times of India. So that's how we set up the campaign. In future videos, I'll post battles from that campaign for your enjoyment. But anyway, that's it for now. Thanks for joining me in the basement. I will see you next time, and until then, may your dice always roll true.